when I saw the well, connecting in conflict, and then also it's the non-violent communication, which is if you were to say to a guy or an Irish woman, an Irish man, I think you should go to one of these non-violent communications, they'd probably punch you and then say, what does that mean exactly? So we should explain that it's really about the way we're not always honest. We tend to have conversations all the time, we're polite or we're otherwise, but we don't really express ourselves fully. Would that be true? Is that the core of what we're dealing with here? Or?
I think that's partially, definitely, that's a part of it. And also, I think non-violence comes in various different forms. So it's not necessarily someone is angrily shouting at you, but actually, if someone is ignoring you, that can be a form of violence.
Like a psychological abuse kind of thing.
Yeah, or even, I think there is just so subtleties in our communication that we don't always acknowledge. We might be, just totally not acknowledging the other person, or for example, if someone says, you're like, oh yeah, sure, we are Irish. In Irish culture, there is a huge sense of humor, which sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with violence, but actually it might be. I think violence is a kind of a weird term. So the person who started this whole thing, there's a whole history in there, but I think it's really about like more effective and honest communication. Right. So, and also non-verbal communication. So it involves so many things. Well,
it's the basis of a million dramas and comedies. The fact that we say a huge amount, in our actions and in the way, even to say, I love you, it can be said in so many different ways that, can be genuinely kind of moving, and can be other times it's just perfunctory, and certainly we do communicate an awful lot through subtle means and through subconscious almost means. So when people go along to this on the 30th of September, what would they hope to sort of be kind of hoping to achieve by this talk?
Yeah, so non-violent communication is a technique of an effective communication, really, but and it can be broken down into various steps. And just to give an idea, that the first one would be to acknowledge, to realize what we feel at a certain time, so what is going on with us, and then the next thing is first of all actually observing what's going on, and then realizing what do we feel, and then that kind of brings us to what we need. So what are the needs underneath? Actually, when we are expressing something, we are not always aware what is really happening underneath. We just think we are angry, but actually we might have some different needs, And then the fourth thing, which is sometimes really difficult, especially like in our culture here, is how do we request what we want in a real way? So we not to be afraid of asking for what we really need for. So that's really the essence of really nonviolent communication. But in the workshop, there will be a bit of a theory of how this kind of all works, but it is really broken down into pieces. So we will get a chance to experience live practices of. So if we are really dealing with any issues, so it could be with our partner, with our close friend, it could be with our parents, who's constantly, we always have conflicting ideas between each other, so it's like a part of life, really, but how we deal with the conflict, really. So is conflict something that we always run away, so we don't deal with, or is this something actually that we can really stay in and not be afraid of being who we are, and also also receive the other person as the way they are? So not to necessarily one person has to give up who they are to be able to get along with the other person, but actually where can we meet, how we can meet with each other, and actually once we realize what is really the need of the other person and what is my own need, and how can we make it work much better for both of us. So it's really a magical tool to actually come together, to actually to work things out in a very beautiful way.
Wow. And has that helped you now? Obviously Dara is a very difficult man, so has that helped you with Dara? He's very dark and complex, so I think he's very troubled, so I'm sure that helps. Really
definitely. Yeah. I think it is definitely what I find in my personal life is it's not so easy to understand. We always assume things. Right. We want certain answer, or we want the other person to do certain things, but we don't actually really tell what really we want, So all that non-verbal communication that we expect is happening is not happening. So then in the end we kind of feel like, well, this is actually, you know, what I wanted from you is this, but then he comes like, what, you never told me. So what I really learned through this process is to be able to express myself in a better way, to know what I want, and to be able to express this so that we kind of sort of know what's going on with each other in a way, you know.
It's such a gorgeous feeling when you kind of basically clear the air. There's a sense that you're genuinely want these things, and we're not dancing around, you know, elephant in the room or ulterior motives, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, things become much more lively. So it's really about like what is really alive in me, what's alive in the other person, and we know it too. We have a tool now. We can sort of check this out with each other. So
we should talk about the great and is it, I pronounced this hopefully right, Yesim
Mosenzon. Yeah.
Beautiful. Now I did see on he did a TED talk in March 2015, over 42,000 hits on that. Was that the beginning for him? Was it the beginning of...
No, I think he says that he started about 15 years ago. He was a professional dancer.
We should walk to the door and we'll step in. What the hell? I think that might actually be rain in Greystones. That's outrageous. Crazy. But yeah, you were saying, sorry.
Yesim. So basically, Yesim was a professional dancer, as far as I know, for 15 years
like
ago.
Me, then.
Just like you, Paul.
Hi guys. So we'll go to the back room there, I guess.
Let's do that.
Hello, man.
Hello.
You're the happy pair, you're not allowed to use your phone pair. Beautiful. So yeah, you're saying he was a professional dancer.
So and then I think he was going through some difficult times in his own life, and then he came across this tool, and then he says actually that this saved his life.
Okay.
It totally changed how he looked into
so
life.
How old is the technique then? Are we talking about decades or more?
Marshall Rosenberg, I would say it is from 70s, 80s. Like it's definitely it's kind of started in the US.
Okay.
So, and the guy who started it was living in Chicago in a really violent area when there was a lot of troubles happening. There's a very interesting sort of history to it. So basically, he was experiencing this violence outside when he was really young, and at the same time, he had this really loving uncle who could just be there for him. So be just really loving. So he realized the essence of actually people. He really believed that it is actually loving and caring.
Right.
But then he couldn't make sense what is going outside. So he thought it is like, you know, it can be just reformulated, and using certain steps we can actually all reach to that more loving place in ourselves. But it requires maybe a little bit of teasing out all the unnecessary things.
Sure. So I suppose it would be a kind of for Joe and Joanna Sixpack, a kind of awareness that this is going to be very hippie-like, or this is going to be very kind of new agey. Now some of that's perfectly valid and perfectly healthy, but it does strike me that this is, you know, very practical. It's not it's not like you're getting into some kind of like you have to eat lentils every day to do this, or you have to do levitation or anything like that. So in I don't know, for you and I don't know if any of your friends have sort of been engaged in this. I mean, does it take a matter of like, you know, weeks, months, years before you can kind of sort of recognize that the pattern has changed, that you've
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I think I have some friends who also said that once they realized what this is, and once they started adopting it in their own lives, it also changed their lives and their family lives. I have a friend who actually decided to, you know, like take this in, and she brought up her kids using this approach. Right. So there's a lot of depth to it, so you can go a lot. This can be a lifetime practice, and it's not just like a communication, it's like a way of life it can become.
Sure.
But at the same time it can be really broken down to pieces, and there are certain nuggets that you can take, and that's where I think Yesim is really strong. I have done trainings with various practitioners who have a lot of different strengths, but I found Yesim's teaching really appealing to me particularly, because he's very he kind of takes away all the unnecessary things and just able to demonstrate it in a really powerful way. So for example, so what you might expect, so if anyone volunteers, says that, well, I have this issue with my boss, and this is like an everyday issue, it is really sucking the life out of me, and I really want to deal with it, and I can't find any other way of dealing with it other than getting really angry every single day. So this can be an example, right? So he says, okay, so imagine that I'm your boss. What do you want to say? So he totally takes this case and deals with it as if, and you can imagine the whole situation can become a bit intense, but it's only in the end to see that it all dissolves and the person, there is a transformation happens, and that was for me like the magic moment, basically.
Yeah. Well, I've often felt too in life in general, you can never, for example, know when you're going to get a flat tire, but you can certainly kind of be prepared how you deal with it, as opposed to, you know, that you can't avoid flat tires or can't avoid disappointments, or and it's all about how you deal with it, you know. And you can see it in different people. In a family like mine, or a large family, I can almost tell how the different members of the family would react to something as simple as that. And it just is all about how you approach life and how you approach each other, and that can be hugely unhealthy, or it can be hugely healthy depending on your choices.
So there are two different things. So one is like how you act in life, so how you apply this on your own. So if you are a person, if you know that sometimes even though you don't want, your words come more angry or more intense than you want, and it affects the other person in an unwanted way. So this is something that you can, okay, maybe I can look at myself. But at the same time, the second one is how you hear other things. So the nice thing is, it's not about you being violent or non-violent. I mean, let's forget about it. But it is actually really being able to see what actually this person coming to you and shouting at you. You don't start not taking it personally. You know that it's not about you, but it's about maybe the other person, and they are trying to tell you a secret message there. So trying to actually tease that out. So it's very interesting. So it's like, in a way, it lifts up a lot of troubles that we create in our heads.
Unnecessary, you know, it doesn't exist really when you're kind of carrying that sort of weight with you. So it's on the 30th of September. We'll put the link to the Facebook page. We'll put a link to the TED Talk as well, just to let people sort of see. Because I think what surprised me and what delighted me was that it's quite humorous. You know, there isn't that. There's a kind of a. I think we all feel, well, this is homework. This is going to be, you know, a lecture. But there's in any good part of life, there's humor. You can see that even in any kind of religion, that if there's no humor, you know you're in trouble. So I think
wherever Irish are, there's humor.
Boom,
it has to be done in that way.
And I know that the Happy Pear Twins are going to be there as well.
Happy Pear. Well,
it's
more like beer.
There's a healthy lunch and snacks. Yes,
lunch and snacks.
They need help really, because I think they're.
Well, I think the boys are also interested themselves. They have done a whole weekend workshop on this a few years back, so they're really interested in the whole topic.
Because they're very angry people. They need to relax. They need to just take it down.
You know,
they need to take it down a bit. Jesus.